Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Karis Circle. Karis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Karis Books, and Karis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. I am thrilled to be here tonight with Trystan Reese to celebrate his book, How We Do Family, From Adoption to Trans Pregnancy, What We Learned About Love and LGBTQ Parenthood. So I'm really honored that Equally Wed, our friends, have decided to sponsor this event with us tonight. Their work is so important in terms of visibility and helping us see many families like Trystan's, like mine, like so many of you who are watching at home. So thanks so much to Equally Wed for being a part of this. So Trystan, I'm just glad that you're here. How are you doing today? Let's just start off there.
Oh my goodness. Well, I was up at 5 a.m. Doing a live television interview for Toronto, which was at 8 a.m. their time. So I don't really know how I looked at 5 a.m., but at this point, I've been going for a while today. So hopefully I'm not too punchy. But I see some of my friends in the chat, and so it's really wonderful to see people that I love who are here.
Excellent. And how's the tour been going?
It's been, honestly, I just feel sad so much because I love being in person with people. And I did have a little bit of a fantasy of like being able to like, it seems so quaint now pre-COVID, like touch people, and just like be with them, not touch them in a weird way, but like just like touch someone's hand, to be like, oh my, thank you for sharing that story. Those kinds of things that I'm like, oh, I miss that. But I know that there are lots of great things about a virtual tour too, which is that I don't have to fly so much and that anyone can join from anywhere. So I'm being appreciative for that. Mostly just loving talking to other book nerds about books.
Yeah. Well, my hope is that you'll get some of the stories that people might otherwise have shared with you in person. Maybe they'll email them to you after they read the book.
I hope so.
We often find that happens. So we'll fingers crossed for that. So I'm wondering if you can kind of shape for our audience just kind of the overarching, shape of the book, the trajectory of the book, and a little bit of, sort of the synopsis, and then also maybe how it came to be.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a memoir that's like in a parenting book drag. So it absolutely is. I'm getting a text from someone on your team being like, hey, did you remember your event? Yes, I remembered it. I'm here. And so, I really did. I wanted to write a memoir. And I don't know if you ever read Dan Savage's book, The Kid, which he wrote in the 90s. And it was just like this short, simple, sweet, funny, irreverent story about like him and his partner adopting a kid through an open adoption in that process. And that just had such an impact on me at such a young age, and I just always thought I wanted to do that. I wanted to just write like a short, sweet, funny book about like a love story. And my publisher and my agent, they were like, yeah, memoir's hard to break into right now. Like, no offense, but you're not Michelle Obama. So what if we do like a parenting book? Because that is an area where there just isn't a lot of great stuff. There's some good stuff. I don't mean to belittle any of my friends who write great kids, books on parenting. But so much of it is so dogmatic. Is that the right word? To like do this or your kid will end up screwed up forever. And so they thought something that's a little bit more about stories and then like some fun, hopefully useful parenting advice in between the stories. And that's really what this is. It's the story of me meeting my partner, falling in love, becoming parents overnight, giving birth to my own kid, and what we learned along the way.
Yeah, that makes total sense that Dan Savage was kind of an early guiding light for this book, or for you even, which is great. So often trans stories are sort of about the adolescent time of transition, like regardless of when we actually came out chronologically in our lives or transitioned, it has kind of a adolescent feel. And so this book elides that very clearly. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about why that was important for you to do narratively.
Yeah, it's so funny. You're the second person, my friend Andrew, who we did one of these, and he was like, well, why didn't you do the coming out story? Was that a choice? And I'm like, no, I mean, I wrote that. I wrote all those chapters. And it was really my incredible publisher, my editor, who said, like, let's not do that. Like, maybe you can do that later if you want, but like, let's just not. And of course, at the time you're like, oh, all my words, but looking back, I'm really grateful that it's not that. It's not. And it's not about like, oh, it's so hard to come out as trans and what did my parents think? It's just not about that. It's about this whole other thing. And I really love that she helped me mine for what was the unique story, as opposed to, of course, everyone's story is unique. But this one in particular, it's something else. And actually, I have friends who helped me be able to like afford to write the book. And they're like, listen, this is selfish. There are no other trans parenting books out there. So like, here's some money, write a book. And it was really, I'm so very, very, very grateful for that. So yeah, just something different, not told as much.
I love that. And I love that community model of support. And it sounds like y'all have a lot of really wonderful community, which is so key and is actually, emblematic, I think, of how many queer and trans folks do choose to parent, right? It's like, it does kind of take a village a lot of the time. So I was wondering if, one of the things I was thinking about in reading your book is, for a long time, the medical model of transition required that we be transitioning towards normalcy. So towards heterosexuality, towards like cisgender passing, all those kinds of things. And a number of important activists, but the person who I thought of the most is Lou Sullivan, who really made space for queer trans men to exist, right? And so I was wondering, you mentioned Dan Savage, who's obviously a gay man. Who were some of your other queer or trans role models that you kind of held in your heart as you were writing?
So many. Honestly, like, it sounds so cliche, I'm sure, to be like a white trans man and say this, but like Leslie Feinberg. Like, I heard Leslie speak when I was 17, and I think about Leslie's words almost every single day from when I was a teenager. In fact, one of the big, like, sort of analogies or the visual images that I give in the book and that I think about all the time is this idea of a mosaic. And I think that technically what Leslie said was something about, random scraps of fabric and we sew them together to make a quilt. So Leslie maybe didn't use the mosaic thing, but still that image, being a teenager and having someone say, like, it's okay if you're getting the scraps. Like, it's okay if you feel shattered. Like, you're going to take all those pieces, put them together, and it's going to be better than whatever was there before it broke anyway. Leslie Feinberg, who told us that anger is a clean burning fuel. For me to be not embarrassed or ashamed of my anger, but to really honor it and allow it to feed some of my fire. And Leslie Feinberg, who too defied expectations and labels and identity pieces, and was so collaborative and so humble. And yes, I mean, like, Leslie Feinberg all the way. And then the people that I reference in the book, though not by name because I was told not to. But Janet Mock and Laverne Cox, who've been out there doing the most on trans education, no offense to anybody else, but like more than any of the rest of us, and really shouldering that burden. And I hope that that's what this book does, is that it takes a little bit off of those folks whose bodies are already so in the crosshairs of transphobia, and for them, racism and sexism as well, and take a little bit onto myself, who, I have some of the privileges that they don't. I mean, they have some privileges that I don't either. But in most ways, I have life a lot easier than they do. And so I really felt like it was my responsibility to do some of that.
Yes, Leslie Feinberg is definitely my guiding light, my ancestor who I think about the most as well. So
I know that's why I said it's like such a cliche. I know, but like I can't. It's just true. It's just true.
Yeah, and
this idea that like also to be butch or femme, like that's okay too. And today, like even it's like 20 years later, there's still this obsession with androgyny and the malleability of the middle. And just remembering that Leslie said, like, if you fight for this, the fluidity, the spectrum, fight for the binary too, like the ends of the binary. And like, don't forget about people who feel there. And for me, I feel like I'm more in the middle. And so it's so good to have that consistent reminder that like, there's nothing wrong or bad with being on the ends of the spectrum either. You know, just so much good stuff.
Yeah, I hope that all of Leslie's work will be revisited by young people and people who just missed it the first time. So not chronologically young, even just young to Leslie's work. You know, I mean, there's so much there that feels very fresh and super relevant, and I think could teach us a lot about grace in this moment. You know, grace for each other as other trans folks and our broader queer community.
And so accessible.
Yeah.
Like that's one thing I wanted with this book is like, I'm not going to use like PhD level words. No one knows what you're talking about. And that was one of Leslie's things is like, I'm a working person. Like I'm here for working people. You know, you never heard Leslie use like cis heteronormativity or like, I tried to read like Judith Jack Halberstam and Judith Butler. Like I'm not smart enough for those books and I don't like feeling dumb.
Yeah. Well, and we do lose people. I mean, and that's one of the things that we talk a lot about at Caris is like the right is very good at mobilizing people and saying, these people are bad. There's nothing wrong with you. Come sit by us. And on the left, and particularly the academic left, it's often very, very alienating and very hard to bring people into the big tent. And so I did really appreciate how accessible, both like in length, even, I mean, as you said, you wanted like a short, punchy, fun, easy to read book. And I think often we forget that like length matters as much as word choice, all of those things. Because I think sometimes people, just as a bookseller, I know people look at a big book and they're like, oh, this isn't for me. Right. And so I think it's really important for folks to be like, oh, I can pick that up and, enjoy it on my lunch break or whatever. And I think that's key. So you mentioned actually talking about Leslie and talking about class. I was thinking a little bit about, it wasn't clear to me necessarily whether your husband's family of origin, if there was a class difference between y'all or if there was just like a social and values difference. But it seemed a little bit like a class difference.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And I think that's something that isn't often talked about as much as a pretty big barrier in queer relationships. Like many queer people are in cross-class marriages and relationships, but that struggle often doesn't quite come up on the front end of dating until you get into the trenches with someone. And so in your case, it happened as you're going to receive these children who are going to become your children. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, you had to do some processing as the person who had maybe more class privilege around your initial reactions about his family or, and I'm not sure, it seems like Biff may also use they, them pronouns. So.
Yes. I was like, oh, this is, I wonder if this is going to come up. Yeah. I mean, Biff prefers gender neutral pronouns.
Okay,
and it's
great.
One of the rare trans people or non-binary people who really doesn't care. It really is like, oh, I have a preference, but it's like fine if you use anything else as well. And so the two of us, made the decision in the book to use he, him for clarity's sake. And because Biff was like, I don't care. And I was like, okay, well, if it's up to me, I'm going to use what you were using for most of our relationship. Although Biff did also change their name midway through our relationship. And so I used the new name in the book, but the old pronoun in the book. There are lots of choices like that. And yeah, I mean, I would say probably the class stuff is still the biggest struggle that we have 11 years into our relationship. And yeah, it really came to the fore when I went and picked up our then niece and nephew, now my son and daughter, and I saw the way that Biff's sister lived and where the kids lived. And I was shocked, and it's embarrassing to look back now and be like, oh, I have my own feelings about my reaction. But I remember being like, there's cockroaches everywhere. Like, there are no toys. Like, the kids don't have shoes that fit. Where are the diapers? And making some offhanded comment to Biff about this is gross. And Biff was real pissed at me and was pissed at me for a long time and was just like, this is how poor people live. And not all, of course. But for Biff, it felt like a real attack on people who live in poverty. And that continued to come up over and over and over again. You know, my assumptions that everyone wants to live a certain way, and my judgments about like what Biff's family did spend their money on or didn't spend their money on or whatever, their choices. And Biff had been working in homelessness on Skid Row for many years at that point. And certainly had a pretty advanced analysis around economic justice in class that all of my, you know, theory and my political education really hadn't quite gotten to. So yeah, that's very much a continued topic of discussion for us, and something we continue to go back and forth on.
I think that's really helpful to just, you know, I appreciated that you just kind of put that in there and said like, this is a thing that is hard for us, because I think it's something that I just don't often see discussed in books about relationships, because there's often like, oh, we fight about the division of labor, or we fight about our parenting styles. But I think so much of, particularly when we're talking about how we raise children, so much of that comes from the values our families taught us. And often those values are very class values. Like even like how much you think, I was just listening to an author, like a productivity author, who was talking about like, oh, you should, you know, basically basically like upper middle class people have a ridiculous idea about how often you need to clean your house. And like, if you liberated yourself a little bit from like, and particularly people who are raised as women, like this is also a sexist idea to keep you in line. And like, if you just chilled out a little bit about how much you think you need to clean your house, like no one is coming to check on you, and like it's probably fine. Now the reality is that in situations where people are living in poverty, often people are coming to check on them, right? And so and their children may be at the, you know, under the surveillance of the state or, you know, social services and things like that. So it's complicated, right? So I think I just appreciated that was in there. And
I think a lot about how, you know, we consistently seem to believe as a human culture that technology is going to lessen the divisions of labor. And I just think so much about the washing machine. Like everyone washed their clothes once a week, or usually the mother in the home washed the clothes once a week. And so the presumption was, cool, now we have, you know, washing machines. Now women don't have to work so much. No. What happened was our perception of how clean clothes need to be changed.
Right.
And now, oh, you can only wear clothes once and then you have to wash them, which I agree with just because stinky. I'm sensitive to that. But it is interesting to see the like sort of the moving target around that. And even, you know, Biff was obsessed with our home being spotless for years, really until our adoption was final. And Biff was able to like sort of relax that, but like almost obsessively so, like couldn't sleep unless everything was put away. Everything was perfect.
Yeah.
And in most cases, no one was coming. No one's coming to check our house. I mean, they were sometimes, but we knew about it, right? But still this perception, what might people think of us when they see our house like this? That's very, very real and very hard to let go.
Yeah. Well, and I think it is all related to internalized homophobia and fear of judgment from the outside and all those things, especially when you're dealing with the state, right? And so one of the things I really thought was funny and interesting was about like, you know, so often I think queer people joke like, oh, you know, if only straight people had to think about making babies as much as queer people think about making babies. But in your case, you kind of serendipitously received your first two children, you know, like they came into your life pretty
planning needed.
Yeah. And in your first pregnancy, which ended in a miscarriage, but that was also pretty fast. And then it seemed that you did more planning for your second pregnancy, and that did take a little bit longer. But your experience to that as a queer couple, it is a little more like some straight people in that you had these kind of serendipitous moments of children entering into your life. And so I wonder kind of if you, you know, what your relationship to helping other queer people and straight people think about like how time works as you're thinking about children and how much preparation you really need versus like, because I think sometimes people are either like, just do it, like you're as ready as you're ever going to be, or they're like, I'll just keep, I just need to make more money, or I just need to be more secure in this way, or I need to own a house before I can have a child, and then they're 50 years old, right? Like it's a wide range, and I think particularly for queer people, there are a lot of different ideas about when you're ready to have kids. So I'm wondering, kind of how that sits with you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like always, they always put me on these panels, these like LGBTQ parenting panels or whatever at these queer conferences pre-COVID. There's just always some like bright-eyed young queer person that like raises their hand and they're like, what advice do you have for queer people who want to become parents? And my advice to them is always wait. And then everyone laughs and I'm like, this isn't a joke. Like, it is really hard work to be a parent. And if you think about all the ways you imagine your parents screwed up when they were raising you, you have to have your shit figured out as much as possible before you invite kids into all your mess. And people will say, well, you're never really ready to have kids. And I'm like, but like you're like more ready versus less ready. Think about like yourself 5 years ago and hopefully how much has grown and improved in your life. Hopefully more stability, hopefully more joy, hopefully more love. Hopefully that's a trajectory that will continue on into the next 5 years. And so I really do tell queer people, like, just like chill, just chill. And to hold tightly to your vision of becoming a family and hold lightly to how you get there, because there are so many variables. And often, I think we, and I mean literally me, fall into some of these ideas of like heteronormative ways of doing things and letting go of that and being like, okay, like if I'm able to have a baby and get pregnant myself, that's great. If not, maybe my parent. If not, maybe we adopt. If not, maybe we have a surrogate. There's never a time when you become a parent and you're like, I would love this baby like more if I had given birth. No, it just doesn't happen. Like I have a friend who works at a cryobank and that's always the joke that he makes is he's like, money back guaranteed. You have a baby, you don't like the baby that you had, we'll give you your money back that you spent on the sperm. And he's like, never has anyone ever come back and be like, wish we'd used 422 instead of 424. No. When a baby shows up, you're like, this is awesome. Or you're like, oh, but that's not about biology.
Right.
That's just about babies being humans. So I just tell queer people, just chill. And this is another thing where class comes into play. Because we became parents overnight with literally no planning, we tried to go to dad groups. This is like a lawyer and a doctor with their kids. And they're like, should we get a second au pair? And we're like, does anyone have any diapers you're not using? Like the systems were not set up for us even there, which is part of why I've tried to become so dedicated to making information as readily accessible as possible. Just like lower the barrier of entry. Again, use accessible language. Don't assume that everyone has $100,000 to hire a surrogate, Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so I was thinking a lot about, anytime I talk to memoirists, I always think about the subject of privacy because you're doing, memoir requires a great deal of craft. I think sometimes people who aren't writers think like, oh, well, I could write a book about myself. I could write about my life. That's not true. It's very hard. And I think particularly, as a trans person, like we are already subjected to so much scrutiny about our private lives and about our bodies and things like that and our histories. And then additionally, you, because you had been pregnant and you had invited a little bit of interaction with the press and you as a form of activism and you had become more visible as a pregnant person, how did that shift your relationship to privacy as you were writing this book? Because you had a very bad experience by being, and it sounded horrible, by being in the public eye, dealing with transphobia, And so I wondered, how did you kind of navigate the idea of privacy this time around? Because you were older and wiser, you had that bad experience. I might have been like, I don't know, buddy, I'm not writing this book after what you went through. So
yeah, I mean, that's actually kind of why I like the idea of a book, because it's long form. It's not a 12-minute storytelling event for the moth. It's not me trying to like rigorously craft my talking point, knowing that they're going to cut the 10-minute interview down to 45 seconds and crafting it so it's basically 8 45-second talking points that if they take it out of context is still going to work, right? I mean, like, I was literally calling my friend at GLAAD who does all the LGBTQ media thing. Like, I was calling the trans messaging director at GLAAD sometimes once a day. At the height of when I was pregnant and telling stories, just be like, Nick, like, do you have a second? Like, will you read through the CNN article with me? Will you watch this CBS piece with me? Like, how can I do better? What did I miss? What did I forget? What about when I said it this way? And luckily, Nick and I have known each other for like 16, 17 years. And he can be like, yeah, you can't say that. Like, that doesn't work at all. People are going to misunderstand you. So do this instead. And I'd be like, okay, no problem. And I'm writing it down. It's so much work. So I love the idea of actually just sort of like telling my story on my own terms, the parts that I wanted to share and the parts that I didn't, and having real conversations with Biff, like, hey, I want to tell this part of our story, and Biff being like, no, and me just saying like, okay, and so there are obviously lots of things that I didn't put in there, and the things that I did very intentionally. Because I thought that it would serve a vital purpose. Like, I didn't want to put in there all the horrible language that people used to describe me and my body. But like, listen, for non-trans people who don't know what it's actually like to be trans, and even in the tiny bit of public eye that I've been in, like, they need to know. They need to know it's a tool that I can use. It was a weapon that was used against me that I can turn around and use as a tool. They say like every tool is a weapon if you hold it right. Well, every weapon is a tool if you hold it right. And so I'm like, I can use this as a tool. And I hated doing it. I just recorded the audiobook last week. I hated putting their words in my mouth. But again, it's about taking some of the discomfort that is held in the trans community, primarily by trans people of color, and putting it on myself in the hopes that it'll sort of more equitably distribute the discomfort around. I can take a little bit in the hopes that it moves someone forward, and they look at that and they're like, holy crap, really? People said that to you? What can I do?
Yeah.
And hopefully have that light a fire in them. Hopefully they can use that anger to fuel their fight, to stand in solidarity with us and make the world a better place for trans folks.
Well, and I really appreciate that and the way you kind of frame that, because I think one of the things that I see a lot, particularly with the way that the conservative media has infiltrated mainstream media, is this idea that because trans people are culturally visible, that we have a disproportionate amount of power. And it's like, no, we have almost no power. But like we have a few movie stars and a few media stars. Like, yes,
they're not even movie stars; they're TV stars.
TV stars, yeah. I mean, and like maybe one or two musicians, and like this idea that somehow that means that we're secretly like running a cabal of like trans people that are gonna like take the children and forcefully turn them trans. I mean, it's wild. But like that's legit like QAnon kind of meme talking points right now. And and it is very, I appreciate that you are bringing race into this, and that's in your book as well. Like so much of this, it's all related to this paranoia and wild myth making about critical race theory and about what Black Lives Matter is doing. Like, we're all these like weird straw men that the right is using. And I think a lot of when I personally have had my feelings hurt by straight people who are my close friends, it has been when they've just been like, oh, but like it can't be that bad. And it's like, no, people say really horrible stuff. Like, and I do think it's really useful to have that in there. Because I think people just think like, oh, well, Laverne Cox, like the world's a better place now. You can get gay married. Like, what else do you want? And so I think and this is from good people, right? Like people who are not seeking to hurt us, right? But I think it's really important for folks to consider like visibility is not the same as power, is not the same as safety. And it's certainly not the same as liberation, right? So I wondered a little bit about, so you mentioned that you negotiated with Biff about privacy. What did you do with your oldest? I assume Leo, your youngest child, was too young, but what kinds of conversations did you have with your two oldest kids about their parts of the book?
Yeah, I mean, same exact thing. Hey, I want to tell these 3 stories. What do you think about that? Here are some of the benefits. You know, other kids who've been in your situation will see what you've been through and they'll feel like they're less alone. Here are some of the negatives. Like this book, as long as the human race exists, like it'll exist in some form forever. And whatever thing that you don't want to be 30 years old and have someone be like, well, in your dad's book, he said that you blah, 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 blah. Like that's the negative. And similarly, like there were some things that, you know, they were like, oh yeah, you can totally tell that part. And then other things that they were like, no, please don't tell that story. Okay, that's fine. So everything that's in there is like kid tested, kid approved. But that's why, you know, I just hate these, you know, these overly rigid parents. You know, they talk so much about like doing things with the consent of their kid. That's great theoretically, but like your kid is 10. So even then, like I am 100% certain that at least one of my kids at some point in the future is going to be like, yeah, I'm really pissed at you for including that. And I'm going to be like, totally. You approved me putting it in there and you were 10 years old. Like right. It makes total sense that your attitude about it would change over time. And all I can do is say that like I tried to be in my own integrity. I tried to tell your story with grace and with accuracy. And to speak as highly as I could of everyone involved, you know, and be honest about how I saw things. And that's kind of like all we can do as parents is be like, I did my best.
Yeah. And yeah, like I think the idea that like consent change your ability to consent to thing changes with age and like, and adults like, and that's not just true of children, right? Like something that you thought was a good idea when you were 25 suddenly feels like a really different thing when you're 40, right? I think that's human. And so I think, you know, having that evolving conversation makes sense, you know, and just being like, yeah, this is a snapshot in time. And hopefully your kids will be like, well, that doesn't define me. That's just a part of my story, right?
Yeah, totally. And then I'll be like, cool, like, how can I support you to write your book?
Yeah.
So you can tell your story on your terms. You know, that's all I can do.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, so I mentioned earlier that you experienced a miscarriage with your first pregnancy. And one of the parts of the book that I really appreciated was that you reminded the reader like that all people experience miscarriages differently, right? And that you say basically the best thing we can do is ask people, how was that for you? Or how is this for you? And I think, you know, I was thinking about it right now in terms of all of us coming out of COVID and all of the different kinds of losses that people are carrying. And so I was just thinking a little bit about sort of larger grief and sort of how that miscarriage, I think, symbolized a lot of griefs that came up in the book potentially, or your maybe your approach to grief. And I wonder if you want to say anything else about sort of how grief functions in the book and your approach to being resilient around grief, or anything like that.
Yeah, it's so funny. I didn't, you never know. I won't say you, but for myself, I had no idea like what parts of the book are going to be interesting to people and which aren't. And so many people have talked about, you know, there's a scene in the book where I go to coffee with a pastor whose church I kind of almost literally wandered into. And I'm not a religious person. I wasn't raised religiously. But having, you know, had a pregnancy loss, wanted just a place to sit with it. And I also wanted the childcare of my older kids so that I could do that. So I could just sit and be quiet for a minute. And this happened to offer that. And, you know, she asked as a new person, you know, in her congregation, you know, can we go to coffee sometime? I said, sure, whatever. And we went and she said, you know, why did you start coming to my services? You know, and I said I had just had a miscarriage. And I just kind of like needed a place to put some of what that was like and what I was going through. And, you know, every single other person I had told had said, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss, which I just hated. I just hated it. It was just such a weird, reductive, almost infantilizing presumption of what that was like for me, which was so much more complicated than a loss. And also I didn't see it as a loss. You know, exactly. And so, you know, she just took my hand and said, what was that like for you? And I was like, there it is. That's better. That is so much better, because then I could really share all of the fullness of it, the physical, the spiritual, the relational, all the parts, not just like, I'm so sorry for your loss. Oh, thank you. Or like, oh no, it's okay. Like that's the only place you can go there. And so I think just being open to people's experiences, being curious, like, again, speaking of discomfort, like, just like, let yourself be uncomfortable for a second. When someone tells you a hard thing, instead of tamping it down or trying to apply a word to it, you know, just being able to say, you know, you didn't get to see your parents for 16 months. What was that like for you? Right? Especially queer folks, we have complicated relationships with our parents, you know, and so we can't, you know, one person may be like, oh, it was great. My dad's crazy homophobic. While someone else like me might say, you know, I'm going to look back on this time and it's going to be like a hole in my heart that I didn't get to see my mom and dad, that they didn't get to see their grandkids. And they're old as hell. They might be watching. They're old as hell. They're like almost 80. That's old. You know, and by letting people share all the messy shit, you know, that I think that's the good stuff. That's when we get to really show up for each other, not by saying, oh, I'm so sorry. But instead just letting people bring all the things. We don't have to take care of them. We just have to be present. That's it. And that's what Solveig, this pastor, I just emailed her today asking for her address so I could send her a copy. That's what she did for me. And that's what I'm committed to continue to do for people in my life.
Yeah, I think it's really lovely. And I had never really considered how just saying sorry, it is almost like putting a period at the end of a sentence. And you're just like, foreclosing further conversation. So I feel like that is a gift that I got from your book, to just feel like, right, keep it open, keep it going, rather than just shutting down that connection.
And it has to be really helpful with other queer people, because again, people would be like, oh, my mom died, and instead of being like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, instead saying like, oh, what has that been like for you? Then they can say it was really hard because they, you know, she disowned me, but we've kind of reconciled, but kind of not. It lets them bring all of it. So
yeah. Pro tip: if you take nothing else from tonight, folks, you got this excellent tool in your tool belt. So thinking about if you could go back in time and tell that 20-something kid who was riding in the car to pick up the kids anything, would you tell them anything?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I just don't do that. And I don't mean to be difficult. I just can't live my life like that. In fact, that's one of the things when I did like an Ask Me Anything on Instagram, and one of my followers was like, oh, what are your regrets? And I was like, you know, I have one, but other than that, I've done a lot of stupid shit. But, you know, sometimes you just have to go through the fire to learn that you're invincible. Yeah. So there's nothing that I wouldn't listen to myself anyway, so.
That's good to know about oneself, you know. So, you know, like so many families I know, you know, your family is a family that is made up of children who came to you through adoption and by giving birth. And, you know, I appreciated the conversations that you had with your older children to prepare them for Leo's arrival, and kind of trying to make sure that you're sustaining those connections and all the things. It sounds like you really did all of the legwork that a child would hope a parent would do, right? Like and obviously who knows, right? Like time will tell, they will tell you, right? I wondered, I thought it was interesting that you said that you were still very surprised by your very visceral physical connection to the child that you gave birth to. And I was wondering if you could talk about that. Because obviously, as you said, you're going to love all your children. Like people, that is not a difference. But the visceral physical part of it did sound different. And I'm wondering what that was like for you.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny because like the visceral connection, I do have it with all of the kids. It just took so much longer for it to form with Lucas and Hailey. You know, it took many months for me to really fall in love with them, to just getting to know them, you know, and it's just sort of like someone puts these two humans in your lap and you're like, okay, who are you? Hope you're cool, you know, and that's it. And so it took a little while for that to click in, you know, that sort of ancestral part of my brain that like the second a car comes roaring around the corner and you're walking on the sidewalk, before even thinking about it, you know, I would just like, exactly. But there was a time when we lived in New York when all four of us were on the subway. Lucas must have been 5. And we're on the subway. We get to the station, the doors open, Lucas walks out. It's not our stop. And like, without even knowing what I was doing, my hand just like reached out, grabbed his backpack and pulled him back in. And I was like, what was that? What was that? I mean, that kind of connection, right? Where like the parts of your brain you're not aware of are like always have the spidey senses about like, is your kid okay? Where's the danger? How could they be safer? You know, all that weird stuff. It kicked in. It just took longer. And yeah, it was a shock to me. I have so many really amazing like birth worker and mental health people in my life, my friends, and they warned us to look out for like all the postpartum stress and postpartum anxiety and depression. They warned us about all the things, and they did not warn me about like what could happen instead or alongside, which was just like the 4th trimester of being like, oh, it's literally like my heart was taken out of my body, but like it's still attached. And that was just profound and so strange. And also really cool. Like I'm a hard worker. I work hard at everything that I do. And being Leo's dad was the first and only thing I've ever been great at from the very beginning and without even trying. And that was really cool.
That's very cool. Did that, like the 4th trimester, when people talk about that, it's like it's a specific time frame, right? So was there an end to that phase of your time with Leo? Did it morph into something else?
Yeah, I think it just slowly over time evolved into the same thing I have with my other kids, which is just like deep, profound, unconditional love and security, you know, knowing that like, it's okay if he goes to, you know, my sister's house for the weekend. Like he will be fine. I will be fine. I will see him again. Like a more sort of like healthy attachment that allows for detachment. Yeah, it just evolved as these things do. Although, you know, I think that he and I are still really close, but mostly because he's almost 4. And I basically have the same approach to life that a 4-year-old does. I want to go on long walks. I want to smell every flower. I want to pet every dog. I want to ask all the questions about the trees and the clouds and the rainbow. I also want to play Xbox Batman with him. I want to read books. You know, the things that my big kids are like, ugh.
They don't want to do that stuff anymore?
Not as much. They want to do other things.
Older is hard. Well, so I don't know if this is a painful question or not, so feel free to just say no, but how did your relationship to giving birth, and particularly that deep closeness with Leo, give you perspective on your older kids' relationship to their birth mother? Did it give you a different feeling towards her, knowing that things were very hard with her? So, but but did it change how you felt about her?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. My mom asked me this question. She asked me this question in a few different ways, basically, like, did the experience of being pregnant and giving birth and having a biological child, did it change my relationship to abortion and choice? And did it change my relationship to, or the way that I thought about my kid's biological parent and their first family? And I told my mom, no, if anything, it just strengthened my original opinion. And she's like, oh yeah, most life experiences do that. They just make you feel the same thing you already felt, but harder. The same thing like with choice. You would think that the experience of being pregnant would make you more likely to be anti-abortion. No, for me, it was like, this is so hard. It's physically, it's intellectually, it's spiritually hard. And to do it against your will, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. And of course, everyone makes their own choices, but it did not make me say like, oh, no, not at all. And similarly, I was just like, this was so much work to grow and birth a child. And it is such a sacred calling. It just feels so visceral, to use your word, and spiritual. You have one job when you're a parent, and it's to take care of your kids. It's to keep them safe. And so I'm even more just befuddled that someone could drop the ball on that. And there are so many really important reasons why that happened. And a lot of them are about our systems, which are not designed to support young women living in poverty, or systems that are not designed to keep people away from addiction and to give them support when they're in addiction. Our systems around ability, access, disability, of course. And there's still that part of me that's like, I do not understand. Like, I would throw myself in front of a goddamn bus for any of my kids.
Yeah.
And I don't understand someone not having that feeling.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. And I think that makes sense to me.
I cannot think of anything that I would not do for my kids. I cannot think of a single thing. And yeah. So I'm more befuddled than ever that was allowed to happen. So
yeah. Well, it sounds like you found your calling, as you said.
I guess.
Yeah. You and Biff are both activists, and you do a lot of front-facing social justice work and facilitation, and lots of different important stuff in addition to raising 3 kids. And a lot of people right now, in particular because of COVID, but in general, struggle with the very practical day-to-day question of how to spend enough time with their kids, still pay their bills, and then do meaningful work that fulfills their soul and like their life purpose. And I'm wondering, I realize that like a memoir is not a full picture of like how one spends their days, but it does seem that y'all have achieved some balance around that. And I'm wondering kind of what your perspective is on how you really do try to construct your life in a way that allows you to do the things you want to do together.
Yeah. It is complicated, but I left my full-time nonprofit job last July. I quit my day job to open a consulting firm. And so that's been great because that means I can basically collapse 2 things into one. So how I make my money is my activism work. And so like doing coaching one-on-one to help people be better bosses to trans folks and like develop these better systems and work alongside my collaborators of color to do anti-racism work with organizations and individuals and communities and collectives. Like, whew, okay, those 2 things now, now I can check both of those things off because they're essentially one and the same. And anytime I feel like they're getting too far spread apart, then I'm like, okay, how can I get them closer together? So if I feel like I'm not doing enough mentorship, enough lifting up of the next generation of trans voices, I'm like, great, can I hire a round of interns this summer? Can I pay some people to like learn and invest in them? Anytime it feels like, can I do some pro bono work for the Trans March or whatever? I just try to figure out how can I get them close together. And, you know, we have a pretty low bar around our house. So like our kids get screen time. We monitor what they watch. Okay. But there are times when I have a call. Biff has a call. Biff runs a nonprofit supporting queer prisoners. Like there are times, usually Biff's board meetings are in the evening. My things are during the day. We kind of switch off, but our kids entertain themselves. Sometimes we take away the screens and we're like, cool, here's Legos and a paint station and Play-Doh. Leave us alone for 2 hours. Hailey, we'll give you $5 if you can do that with Leo for 2 hours. And Hailey's like, yes, money, you know? And so we do that. And we've tried to create lives that we don't need a vacation from. You know, we try to work as sustainably as possible, although I've broken all of those rules this Pride Month. Never again. You know, we try to be present with each other when we're present. And I've tried to raise kids that like some of the same things that I do. So when I want to take a road trip or go hiking or for a walk and smell all the different flowers, you know, I at least have one kid that wants to do that with me. Yeah. And so it's incredibly difficult. The like money stuff has been hard. Like I can't manage my social media stuff anymore. I always have this fear that someone's trying to reach me who needs help, but they can't get through. You know, all I see is like 84 random notifications and then like 24 hate messages. And then I'm like, oh no, buried in there somewhere is like a 16-year-old, you know? So I've had to really manage my own fears around that and trust the universe to take care of people that I'm not able to engage with.
Yeah. Well, you got to set limits around that kind of stuff because it will eat you up for sure. One of the parts of the book that struck me was you told a story about how shortly after Leo was born, you posted a photo of him and another trans person kind of came after you about, you know, questioning why you weren't raising him with a gender neutral name or using gender neutral pronouns for him. And, you know, we collectively, activists talk about this kind of peer-to-peer group policing as like horizontal hostility. And that happens a lot in marginalized groups, right? Like, and it also happens a lot with new parents, especially often new birthing parents, right? Like, and you mentioned this some about like whether or not you're going to give your child formula, whether or not you're going to feed them with your body, like those kinds of things are, you know, how you do, whether or not the child co-sleeps with you or sleeps in their own bed, like whether you let them cry it out, all that stuff is very contentious and often very mean. People are very mean to each other about it in a way that seems awful from the outside, especially when you have just gotten a whole huge dose of hormones running through your system after giving birth. I thought
you were going to say you've gotten a whole huge baby out of your body, and I was like, yep.
Also that. All of the things, I would imagine. So I was interested in this parallel between sort of trans people policing each other's life choices and you know, all of that, the politics of embodiment, and then, you know, birthing parents and often mothers policing each other's embodiment and life choices. And kind of, I'm just wondering if you can talk a bit about that impulse, and then also like sort of anything that you've learned to protect yourself from it, but also like catch ourselves before we do it to other people, if that's something that you, because I think we all want to do it sometimes. Like that is human. Nobody's above it, but it's crappy, and I don't want to do it, and I don't want people to do it to me.
Yeah. I mean, what I've really found is the through line between both of those kinds of areas where this shows up is trauma. And like, it's just been so clear to me looking back on that situation that wasn't about me. Like, that's a trans person who's like been through some shit. And it's on them. Like, they should own that and try to figure that out and maybe like not take it out on another trans person. But looking back, I'm like, oh, like trauma is like a bruise, right? You don't have to hit it very hard for it to really hurt. And the same thing happens in the parenting world. I'm like, listen, breastfeeding can be traumatic. And if you've worked hard and you have like chapped nipples that are bleeding and your baby needs you every 3 hours, all day, every day, and you're weighing their diapers to see if they're actually getting anything, that's traumatic for some people. And if someone goes out there and says, you didn't actually need to do any of that, you could have just used formula, you're like, nope, 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 nope. Formula's bad and wrong, right? You have to defend this decision that you made, co-sleeping. A lot of people end up doing it, and then they're like, oh, this sucks. Like, I haven't had sex with my partner in 4 years, and now my kid won't go to sleep unless I'm lying next to, like, oh, no. And if you tell them, yeah, co-sleeping, there's not any science around that. You didn't need to do that. They're going to be like, nope, right? We all do it. We create a whole dogma around the decision that we've made, especially if it was a decision that was hard for us. And then when someone violates it, we're like, nope. But to a person, when people are that rigid in their ideology, I'm like, there's pain here. Like, no person who's had a fine experience nursing their baby is going to go out and police the way that somebody else is feeding their kid. They're just not. Like, it just doesn't happen. Everyone I know who had an easy time body feeding was like, yeah, you could do it. You don't have to. Your friend could feed your baby. You could use a bottle. You could use formula. You could bid. Doesn't really matter, right? Because why would we have an opinion? Same as most trans people are like, I mean, you can gender your baby when they're born. Just like, don't hold too lightly to it. I mean, don't hold too tightly to it. Most trans people are like, I mean, your choice. I'm going to do something different, but I trust you. Like, that's the average approach. Someone's going to react from that place if they've had a lot of trauma. And so that's helped me separate out. It still sucks. It's really hard. Come on, trans people. I can't help think of AOC. I saw this really gorgeous video of her where someone's really, really criticizing her for the Green New Deal, right? And she's like, you know what? You try. I'm out here doing my best, trying to make something, trying to deal with climate, trying to get people jobs. If you have a better idea for how to do it, you do it. But right now, this is my thing. I'm doing my best. Whatever better idea you have, go for it. I will 100% support it. Until then, fuck off.
Yeah.
And in a way, I'm just like, yes. Or Brene Brown talks about being in the arena. That like when you're in the arena, you only listen to other people who are willing to be in the arena. If someone's just sitting in the stands telling you how to fight, they don't know. You come down here. You be subjected to what I was subjected to, and then see how you want to approach gender and your baby.
Yeah. I mean, I 100% agree with that. And I think often people really don't consider what someone who they perceive to be a visible activist on social media might go through. And, so there's the bigots and the transphobic jerks, but then there's also all of the wounded trans and queer people who want you to be something more than what you could ever be to them, right? Like, you're like, I'm just an avatar on Instagram. Like, you don't know me, right?
Or they see like, oh, as an influencer, I got paid to post for such and such brand, and they're like, oh, that must be like so easy and fun. It's not. Like, I don't do almost any of those partnerships anymore because they take 8 to 10 to 12 hours to do one sponsored post. It's not worth it. You end up getting paid like $10 an hour, and you're like, this was not worth it. It's work. And is it plowing fields? Of course not, which my ancestors did. Was it picking strawberries? Of course not. It's not that kind of work. And it's not glamorous enough for people to be coming for me in that way.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to let folks know if they have questions, they are welcome to put them in the chat. But I also just wanted to see, what's next for you. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about your consulting business and kind of like a little bit more about how folks reach out to you or the kinds of work that you're hoping to do in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what's next. In August, I'm going to the Lambda Literary Nonfiction Writers Retreat. And I just learned I'm supposed to send them a manuscript for that. I'm like, oh no, I don't have a manuscript other than all those deleted chapters from my book. And so maybe that is where I go next. I'm not sure. I'll have to decide. So hopefully more writing, hopefully more storytelling. You know, I just like, the things that are most fun for me are being in community with people. And sometimes that's like storytelling. So like going to people's companies and holding space for conversations. Like, I really think that's fun. I love being with people and hearing where they're coming from and all of that. Yeah, and then continuing to use social media, obviously, as a storytelling platform. It's another thing that the people in my life are like, you have to post once a week, every Monday. I'm like, that is not how the muse happens. Sometimes it's 2 posts in one day, as there was recently when the Supreme Court, what's that called? The annual thing. Anyway, it was like the date that the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage. And like, I worked on marriage for a long time. I think there's a really interesting intersection overlap with the trans movement and the marriage movement. Great, 2 in one day, but then I won't post for 2 weeks. So yeah, just continuing to write and be in community with people and hope that magic happens.
Well, Lambda is I went to Lambda in 2011. It is a wonderful place. So I think it's one of our best queer incubators, I think, for writing. So I'm really excited for you to be there.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. And is there anything else about your book that you that we didn't get to talk about that you want to make sure people know?
No, and I didn't realize we're at time. No, nothing else other than just, hopefully people read it. My wish is that if people do read it, that, you pass it on to someone else. I don't need the whatever 10-cent royalty. I don't care about that. What I just care about is the people who need the story get it.
Yeah. And we always tell folks, so you can click this teal button at the bottom of your screen to buy it directly from Karis, which does really help us. But we also encourage you to buy it for your school library, encourage your public library to buy it. So many queer people and trans people go to the library to find evidence of ourselves. So the more we can get these books into particularly rural libraries, places where folks might not have other access, it can be really a powerful thing. So even if you don't personally need this book for yourself, maybe buy a copy and donate it to someone who does, because it really does make a huge difference in seeing ourselves, right? And there are a growing number of trans and non-binary men who really are excited to become birthing parents. And I think that's one aspect of this book that we didn't spend a ton of time on, but it's really important that folks know that they are not alone if that's a desire they have, right? We do have one question. So
okay.
let's look this one question from Megan. She says, this might be in your book, but I haven't read it yet, ordering it now. I'm wondering what you would want to say about trans parenting in comparison to traditional parenting, if any. Do you draw a distinction?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I wrote the book, was because I think people either focus on what makes us different too much or focus on what makes us the same too much. And this book is, I hope, blended. Like, I want people to see themselves in my parenting fails and see some successes that they can 100% please have them from a different model of parenting. And so, yeah, I do think that Biff and I parent differently. I think we're more equitable in the way that we both treat each other, the way we treat the kids, the way that we do deal with, like you mentioned, like household delineation of household tasks, those kinds of things. We don't have, a person of a certain gender who does a certain kind of job. We do, like Lucas used to be named Riley. Our kids get to change their names. Who cares, right? Who cares? Hailey's trying, going by he, him this week. Okay, what does that hurt to let people explore all the parts of themselves? I used to be an actor, and I'm like, all of us contain multitudes. All of us have different parts of ourselves that should get a chance to sing every once in a while. So I think those are some things that I hope people take away, as well as that approach talking with kids about issues of social justice from the very, very, very beginning. So we can hopefully leave behind a generation of folks who will prove us wrong in so many ways.
We have one more great question from Pamela Sweeney. What would you say is the biggest lesson your children have taught you about yourself?
Oh, I'm gonna get emotional. I mean, other than Biff, my kids are the only people I feel like I am perfect. Like, of course I'm gonna mess up, but like, they never expect me to be anything but exactly who I am. And I don't have to perform for them. I don't have to do anything special. I get to be like the rawest, purest, most authentic, vulnerable part of myself. And they love me anyway and don't want me to be different. And so that feeling, and especially for a trans person, that's, I don't know, for me, like it's very new and very weird. I'm not used to feeling that way. So that's what they taught me about myself, is that I'm okay just the way that I am.
I love that. And that's a perfect place for us to wrap up. So thank you so much for your time. Thanks to everybody watching at home. We really appreciate it. And I wish you all the success in the world.
Thank you. You too.
Take care.